Andy, my dude, have you heard of the magical website builder known as Squarespace?
Ugh, not another Squarespace ad. I feel like every podcast is sponsored by them.
Hey, don't knock it till you try it. Yes, okay, it is overhyped, but actually it lives up to the hype. Squarespace is like a website fairy godmother. With a click of a button, your site transforms into a beautiful masterpiece.
A website fairy godmother? That sounds interesting. What makes it so magical?
Well, for starters, those slick templates make anyone look like a professional web designer. Pick one, customize the colors and fonts to match your brand, and voila. Plus, the drag and drop fluid engine is so easy, your grandma could build a site on Squarespace.
Well, she did knit me a lovely scarf last Christmas. Maybe website design is next.
Exactly. And when you're ready to sell your Nana's handmade scarves online, Squarespace has built-in e-commerce. Add a store with one click. Get flexible payment options. Then watch those sales roll in. And when she wants to teach others her steezy scarf skills, Squarespace's new courses feature is just the ticket. Nana can set up her curriculum and enrollments and payments in a snap and become the next e-knitting influencer.
Oh, wow, you really sold me with the grandma angle. Sign me up for that free trial.
Just go to thenextreel.com/Squarespace and transform your site into a beautiful Squarespace masterpiece.
Well, thanks, Pete. Even though it's overhyped, Squarespace actually sounds perfect for Nana's site's needs. Appreciate the warning on the ads, though. I'll brace myself next time I listen to a podcast.
Anytime. Let me know if you need any help getting that site up and running. Andy, can you believe we've almost hit 700 episodes of The Next Reel?
I know, it's crazy. And with all the other episodes in our family of podcasts, we are well over 1,200 episodes of movie conversation. It's really pretty amazing that we've gotten to have these in-depth movie chats every week for over a decade now.
And we couldn't have done it without our loyal community of film fans. Their support over the years has meant so much.
For sure. That reminds me, we should give the merch store a shout out. Buying shirts from thenextreel.com/merch is a great way listeners can continue to support the show. Plus, they get to sport our great designs.
Absolutely. I think sometimes folks forget we have a variety of shirts, mugs, phone cases, and more available. In fact, a great place to start is with a shirt sporting the Next Reel's logo.
We also have that classic Fast Times Spicoli Surf School tee, or the weirdly popular Rusty's European Tour shirt.
The one from National Lampoon's European Vacation. Why is that so popular?
Search me, but we have sold a ridiculous number of those. I guess there are a lot of Rustys taking trips to Europe?
We're always adding new designs based on movies we've covered, like our brand new design for a streetcar named Desire, featuring a streetcar named Desire. So if you want to rep your love of TNR and films, head to thenextreel.com/merch.
Every purchase helps us continue to have these weekly in-depth conversations. So visit thenextreel.com/merch today.
And as always, thanks for listening and being a part of the Next Reel community. We've got lots more great movie chats coming your way. This is The Next Reel, everybody. I'm Pete Wright, and that there is Andy Nelson.
Hey, hey, hey.
And we spoil movies. Tonight, it's Targets from 1968, proving that Peter Bogdanovich is not only funny, he's also terrifying.
A typical American family at dinner. Mom and Dad, their beautiful daughter-in-law, and their only son, Joe, a homicidal maniac.
How's your dad? It's okay.
Here you go. Thanks a lot. What you hunting this time?
I'm gonna shoot some pigs.
Targets, a movie about a war inside a man's head.
So Targets, Pete, Targets came out in 1968. We are doing this series of films from 1968 that are crime films. That is the particular series that we're in right now. But it also connects to this overarching idea that we had for the fall, where we are looking at films and series that began in 1968 because it's their 50th anniversary. And in the case of the crime films, I think part of the reason we went with this is because 1968 and the late 60s, it was a pretty volatile time in the U.S. And looking at the way that crime was depicted on screen, I think there's some value to that.
Absolutely. And it's funny because we're not trying to make with any of these films. We're not trying to make any connection to a specific film influenced that was either influenced by or influenced events at the time. But we're looking at these films insofar as how they actually represent the time, how they reflect the time. And in the case of these crime films that we're talking about, specifically in the case of Targets, I hope that you, after listening to this conversation, will share with us that in fact Targets was a fascinating reflection of the time, the late 60s, and in particular, the year 1968.
It's a very tricky thing making a film because you can be timely, but because a film takes us such a long period of time to write and get made and edit and then go through the distribution process, it can be quite a bit of time that elapses before it actually hits theaters. So, inevitably there will be some lag in some ways, or in the case of this one, which we'll talk about, the way that things changed between the time it made and ended up getting released.
And in particular, you start to see that there is lag after the film, lag in terms of how the film is released, in how the film is received, in how the film is ultimately remembered over the long arc of history. And no greater example of the rough seas of memory is there than in the film Targets.
And what's nice about this series also, I feel, is looking at these films that are celebrating their 50th anniversary and how prevalent are they today? Do they still say something that matters to today's audience? Or has it become a film that is relegated to the past? That will be another interesting thing to explore with this particular series and this overarching series that we're looking at.
Andy, you and I had not seen this movie going into this weekend.
That's correct. This was my first time watching the film.
Is it what you expected?
That may not be a completely fair question to ask of me because I knew what it was. I knew the story. I walked into this having a good idea as to what the concept was. I just hadn't seen it, but I kind of knew what I was stepping into.
That feels like you cheated.
Maybe.
Yeah, no, you
It also doesn't help that I watched his introduction to the film before I watched it, which also gave a lot away.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I saved that after.
Yeah,
I didn't know what it was about. I saw the artwork for the movie, and I knew that there were sniper sights involved. There were guns. There were probably going to be some guns. I had no idea that it was going to be such a prescient testimonial on the nature of gun restriction, gun regulation in this country, now 50 years old. I had no idea that that was coming, and I was deeply moved by the movie.
It really holds no punches, and that's what I found most intriguing about the film. Watching it for the first time is, exactly how prescient it felt. How it really it felt timely for when it was made, 1968, coming on the heels of some other horrible instances that I'm sure we'll talk about. But nowadays, with everything else that has been going on, it really feels just absolutely just painful and horrifying to watch a film like this and just see how it unfolds. And I think the most interesting part for me was kind of the relationship between Boris Karloff's character and this killer, and kind of the change in monsters and what a monster was when he was acting in his earlier roles, and what monsters were in 1968, and certainly all the way up through present day.
That was the most interesting thing for me. It's sort of a dissertation on the change of horror, right? The things that we find fantastical, the things that we're scared of, and the fact that they captured this feeling of terror to just go outside, to be outside, that the out of doors is under siege, is under threat. Is, as Bogdanovich says, that's modern horror, speaking about 1968, right? And that's the context shift we're trying to make for certainly for Karloff to demonstrate that these two parallel stories, this aging horror actor and this modern horror, are going to come to head. Tim O'Kelly, I don't really have a memory of Tim O'Kelly, and after this movie, it looks like he all but disappeared. He is the young assassin.
Right. Yeah. He was a somebody that Bogdanovich cast very specifically because he had that kind of Americana boyish look that just felt very pure, very American, very straight cut and clean, and just was somebody who fit the part of this horrifying character that ties into somebody like Charles Whitman. And just, that who was the tower sniper at the University of Texas. And he was looking for somebody who had that vibe. And he certainly found it in Tim O'Kelly, who, yes, I found incredibly effective in this role. And you're right, he did not act for very long after this. His career was relatively short-lived. And I think it was one of those things where even Bogdanovich was like surprised, because he's like, he did a great job. I don't know what happened to him. I would love to have seen him continue his career, but...
Yeah, because he had that. It was that Americana feel, right? And you're right, when you look at these images side by side of Charles Whitman and Tim O'Kelly, you get that same sort of like all American kid. Whitman had the high and tight. He was looks like a much more recent release from the armed forces, but he definitely had that kind of robotic happiness to him, Tim O'Kelly, right? He was this guy that, when he leaves the gun shop, just how enthusiastic he was to, whether he was eating a Baby Ruth or, buying excessive amounts of ammunition. And that, I think, is one of the things for me that made him such a terrifying character, right? What is it that when you look at him, made him scary?
Well, I think that is what is depicted so wonderfully here, is really nothing about him is by nature scary. He seems pretty straight-laced and normal, as you would say. I mean, there are moments about his character that are a little off-putting, like when we first see him come home from the gun shop, and he's looking around his house and he's looking at all the pictures of his, he's got a war photo and his family photo and his wife at some honeymoon or something. And you get a sense of his life, but it's also just a little peculiar because he spends a lot of moments, and the film lingers on him kind of staring at these photos for a good amount of time before his wife realizes that he's come home and says, "Hey, we're all here. Let's watch the show," or whatever they were doing. And it's just moments like that just are ever so slightly off-putting. And I think that's what is most effective about the film, is how normal everything is about this guy, yet there's just a little hint of something that's wrong. The other scene for me that really stood out as intensely uncomfortable was when his wife comes home from work, and I don't know if she was a waitress or something, but she comes home and it's the middle of the night and he's sitting up in bed in the dark smoking, and it is dark, like pitch black, and the way that it's lit is just beautifully dark, just haunting. And every time he puffs on the cigarette, you just get that light on his face. And then she comes home and he's, they have a little conversation before she goes to bed, but it's all done in the dark. And he tells her he doesn't want the lights on because it's hurting his eyes. It's beautifully done as the scene, but it's also really off-putting about this character. And I think that's what we're getting here is these moments that seem so normal, but there's something slightly off about them. So by the time we see him go to the tower and start picking off people on the freeway, we're really getting a good sense. And we already have a sense, like he's eyeballing Orloff through his scope when he's in the gun shop. He's eyeballing his father through the target when they're doing target practice. He there's always an excuse and everything. And so it just adds to that uncomfortable vibe we get with this guy. And it all comes to fruition when his wife comes home and she just woke up and she comes into the room and he shoots her point blank. Oof.
I think I want to talk about that sequence, but just a comment on what you said there. I mean, that sequence in the dark when she comes home from work, I think you're absolutely right. What happened immediately before that sequence? I think it was he went to the gun shop, was buying a bunch of ammunition or something. He had it's revealed that he has all those guns, and there's something that happens right before it. And now the order of operations escapes me, but it sitting in the dark, I was convinced that he was laying next to a body. That was going to be the big shock. It wasn't just the gun on the night table. I thought, oh my God, she's going to turn the light on and he's going to be next to somebody that he shot, like his mom. And it's going to be there. So I was already sort of primed for horror when the sequence starts the next day after he writes the letter. And we see that super close up die in red type. So.
Well, because we see his wife leave, she goes to work. They're having a conversation. She goes to work. And then I think it's like...
Yeah, the parent, they were all watching TV.
Right. And he has that just super creepy moment where he kind of is sitting by himself for a moment. And he goes... And it's these shots are done like in single long takes, which it's so just nice. It really puts you into this guy's head where he, his wife leaves and he kind of has that like moment where he, OCD folds her sweater perfectly and then puts it away. And then he goes, I think his parents are watching TV in the other room and he just kind of sits on a chair for a little bit, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. And then he goes out the door, like the swinging door, over to his car, and we don't see him again until that dark shot. And yeah, the way that's constructed, I felt like he was leaving the room to go kill his parents.
Yeah, to do something gross.
It's totally constructed that way.
Okay, well, I'm glad we agree. Then we actually get the murder sequence, and this is really tightly woven into the actual history of the Whitman thing, all the way down to Whitman killing his mother and his wife. He did it in this case with a knife and not a gun. But the little details, like, I'll say, quote, burying his victims, his wife and his mother, in their beds or in blankets, and kind of, sort of preserving them, a little bit of a ceremonial bent there. And we get a little bit of that here with this exchange. That sequence when his wife comes in to kiss him, and we get that series of really disjointed cuts of her approaching him, his hand on the gun, her approaching him a little bit closer, his hand on the gun, moving it past the typewriter. She approaches him for the kiss, his gun comes up, and we see it just sort of graze her nightgown, and then she falls away. There isn't a lot of gore in this movie. It's remarkably gore-free given the subject matter, but that sequence was, that introduces us to his mindset, and it's super terrifying, because it perfectly captures this, you never know who you think you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think it's interesting how much they patterned after Whitman and how they really kind of built this story with a lot of those similarities, like the way that he killed his mother, the way he killed his wife, the way he kills, in the movie, he kills the grocery man who happens to be there delivering groceries. In Whitman's case, he actually, when he's killing his wife, he was typing a letter. And then he wrote in the letter, it says, "Friends interrupted, 8/1/66, Monday, 3 a.m., both dead." It's like, so he kills some friends who heard a gunshot, and came over. And it's the same kind of horrifying, separation that he has from everything that's playing out that we see here, the way he cleans everything up, and then the way that he kind of goes off to the highway and starts picking people off there. It's really just shocking.
Meanwhile, we have this absolutely uneventful story, which in any other movie without this parallel sort of horror show going on might have been an interesting bit of drama. And that is the story of Boris Karloff's character playing essentially Boris Karloff, and he is retiring from the business. He doesn't like the horror business anymore, and it's all of the mechanics around trying to get him to agree to do this public appearance, to not give up on the last screenplay that everybody seems to want him to play. And ultimately, we're meandering through this character drama and a little bit of comedy so that we can get to the point where these two stories meet together. What'd you think of the Karloff angle?
I think because Karloff is in it and the way that he is just portraying this alternate version of himself as Byron Orloff, I find it just so endearing. His character is so touching, and you really can connect with this actor who just doesn't feel like he's fitting in and is just tired of seeing the drivel that he's doing and just wants to kind of throw in the towel. I really am touched by all of the stuff going on with him and the people, and it just, you're right, it feels so normal and I don't want to say not interesting, but it just seems kind of like everyday life in Hollywood. And to that end, it's like, okay. And the interesting thing is, because these are intercut, these two stories, there's a point to that interconnectedness of these two stories, and that somehow everything is going to tie together. You just don't exactly know how. I know at the beginning you see him kind of eyeballing Orloff through his scope at the store, but not as with the intention of, I'm going to kill this guy. It's just, he's doing it because he's creepy, and that's how he kind of checks these things out. And the way that everything ended up coming together, I think, worked really effectively. And I didn't have a problem with the drastic separation we have between these two storylines. If anything, it reminded me of many of the types of films that you would see coming from like Robert Altman or even Paul Thomas Anderson, where you just had a lot of story threads and you were following everyone's stories and waiting to see if there would be something that would connect them all together. In this particular case, it is exactly that type of film. And I think it works really well, blending these two vastly different stories together.
Well, it really does. And it's this Karloff angle that makes the movie quiet. Right? It makes the movie just sort of paced. I don't want to say meandering, but it's a movie that just sort of moves fluidly through the life of this guy. It allows us to really live inside some great dialogue. Really like some of the wit between Orloff and his assistant Jenny. Love Bogdanovich's character. He plays this director and writer, Sammy Michaels, and he's ends up being a fantastic foil, and a little bit of drunken comedy that comes in here. All of this is going on while this just serious nastiness is happening with Bobby Thompson. I love that you bring up the point where he's looking through the sight from the gun store at Orloff, because that ends up, you're right, being just this sort of everyday thing. He's just sighting the weapon, and by the end of the movie, you realize how these two meandering stories are going to just sort of flow together at the end. As soon as I heard the, I need you to make this appearance at the drive-through sequence, and he said, I don't want to make the appearance at the drive-through. Okay, I'll make the appearance at the drive-through. You know that's where it's going to end up, and it ends up building an incredibly powerful intensity, toward what we know is to come. And now I think the gift of hindsight of this movie, that we have 50 years of experience with these sort of mass, gun attacks, it makes it that much more intense. And I don't know a lot of movies that have this, that give you this sense of perspective and become more intense this way. We know what the experience of these mass attacks are like now personally, like maybe not personally, but we've seen so many of them, and the numbers are only growing, that when we watch this movie that comes from an arguably much more innocent time, we have the gift of knowing where we ended up, that Bogdanovich and team did not have. And yet they still captured this experience that is now more intense for us today, I think. And in that regard, the movie, I guess you could say, has aged well. that it's telling a story that is as resonant today as it ever was.
Oh, absolutely. This film is as hard hitting as, I mean, I don't know if you watched the animated documentary Tower that is about Charles Whitman and the tower at the University of Texas back in 66.
Yeah.
It is an incredibly powerful documentary that is certainly worth watching, that gives you a really interesting perspective on everything that happened that day and just how horrifying it was. And, then you put this on and this hits home just as strongly as that does, because, I mean, it's obviously from a different perspective, but it has that power and that resonance that makes it feel very authentic. The lack of score, I think, may also help with that. It just, everything feels much more close to reality, the way that it's depicted within the film.
There are some little behavioral things too, Bobby. The way he drives, you just know he's not up to any good when we first meet him. Hustling around that great Mustang, and he's a terrible driver. Terrible driver. I thought he was going to hit that kid on a bike.
Right.
And stuff. So we go from this to Voyage of the Planet of Prehistoric Women to The Last Picture Show and What's Up, Doc? Would not really have seen that coming. We got to talk about the dichotomy that is P-Bog. This is what the New York Times review of this film had to say. Why? The invariable question of today's headlines about the random sniper murder of innocent people is never answered in Targets. This is the only flaw, and a serious one, in the original and brilliant melodrama that opened yesterday at the 46th Street Embassy Theater. Except on this one count, which simply can't be ignored, this admirably spun and gripping little movie, whose only name is Boris Karloff, marks a most auspicious feature debut for a young Peter Bogdanovich, a former film writer and historian who has now taken the plunge, camera in hand. He should never let go. It was published August 14th, 1968. The venerable Howard Thompson. This movie is one of those that defined Peter Bogdanovich behind the camera and at the pen.
It really did. He was already kind of he was in the industry. He had been working before he even started kind of in film, making film projects. He was already working as a writer, but more as kind of a documentarian writer or a news writer. He was interviewing directors, writing books and articles about their projects and what they were doing, and he talked to a lot of great directors like Howard Hawks and Alfred Hitchcock, and learned a lot from them about how to do this before he started working with Corman. And when he was working with Roger Corman, that certainly is a place where, as we know, Roger Corman is one of those producers who really came, his goal was always to make money with his films. And according to him, every movie that he's made has been profitable. It's a really interesting thing because he does things with such low budgets, and he'll do whatever it takes to make something effective that is actually going to find a way to make its money back. And I think that he had certainly done that here. And working with Bogdanovich, I believe, what was the film that Bogdanovich was working on with him before this one? Bogdanovich was working as a writer. Before this, it was Wild Angels. He worked doing some writing on the Wild Angels with him, and that's the famous Peter Fonda film where you have that great bit of dialogue where he's in court and we want to be free. We want to be free to do what we want to do, and that's what we're going to do. And that is used in the song that is featured so prominently in World's End.
That's right.
That's the movie.
That's the movie.
Yes.
Okay.
So that's the Wild Angels. He worked on as a writer with that, and then Corman was really found him. He connected a lot with him, and said, let's have you direct something. And so he said sure. He was ready to do that, and this is the film that he wanted to do. It was nice that Corman let him come up with something. He didn't say, "Here, I've got this horror script that I want you to handle." He just said, "What do you want to do?" And this is what he came up with. But he gave him certain rules. And I think
I love these are the best. It's the conditions, right? Like, you can do whatever you want, but here's who you got to work with.
What's great is Roger Corman had worked with Boris Karloff in the past on a film called The Terror, and maybe others. I'm actually not quite sure. But Boris Karloff owed Roger Corman 2 days of work. And so what the stipulations were with Peter Bogdanovich, Roger Corman said, "You can make your movie, but you have to shoot with Boris Karloff for 2 days. You also have to use 20 minutes of this other movie I made of his called The Terror, which takes place in, it's a historical horror that took place in war-torn France, I believe. And then you can, shoot the rest of it to come up with on your own." And so he was trying to come up with a story that made sense. He's like, well, this movie doesn't make any sense. I want to make a modern movie, but I can't tie in this footage from this other movie very effectively. It's going to be silly. And so he was working with his then wife, Polly Platt, and just kind of off the cuff was just like, oh, what if we have it where he's an actor and we show the footage of this movie in it like it's his actual movie, and we show the ending of it, and then we cut to a screening room, and he's like, "Oh, what a terrible movie," and they laughed about this, and he's like, "Wait a minute, maybe that's a great idea." and hence this movie was born, and he had been wanting to make a movie about Whitman, or somebody had suggested it to him. And so he was very kind of interested in that, and tying Karloff in on that seemed like an interesting idea for him.
Right. Well, it's a brilliant idea. And at the same time, Bogdanovich is having a conversation with Harold Hayes, who served as the editor at Esquire, where Bogdanovich had been writing, and suggested, hey, you should make a movie about the Whitman thing. As he says in this introduction, Bogdanovich, he says, Karloff was pretty old-fashioned compared to someone who just goes to a tower and randomly shoots people. That's modern horror. That line really stuck with me because, watching him come to terms with how he was going to weave all of these sort of constituent elements, these requirements for working with Corman, for getting this movie made, for using all of the terror stuff, and telling a new original story, not even that highly fictionalized story of a current event, and weaving it all together. It's just smart filmmaking.
It really is. That's what really caught me when I watched the film, is how brilliantly he executed all these things. And he was really nervous because as he was writing this, he's just like, well, I only have Karloff for 2 days. And Samuel Fuller, the director, who was also a friend of Bogdanovich's, told him, because he had actually he came on and helped him rework the script and everything. He said, don't worry about that sort of stuff. Just write the story you want to write. And if it ends up that he needs to end up working more days, they'll figure that out later, or they'll have you rewrite it. But right now, write the script the way you want it to be. And that's what they did. And they ended up shooting with Karloff for 5 days. But and luckily, because he did push to get the script the way that he felt it needed to be. And it was a very smart script.
Very smart script. And we should say Samuel Fuller, his full name was Samuel Michael Fuller, and that ended up being the name of the character that Bogdanovich plays, Sammy Michaels, as a nod to his buddy. I think that's very sweet. It's very charming.
That's great.
Shooting on freeways, though, turns out is hard to do.
Yeah, you're not supposed to film on freeways. I mean, I'm not sure what the rules were then. Obviously, there are ways to do it. It just costs a lot of money to close freeways down. Permitting, you're getting your locations manager to handle all of that. It can take months of planning to deal with a city and close things down. I mean, you look at something like La La Land. Obviously, they're not just running in and doing that guerrilla style. I mean, it is doable, but back then, I'm not exactly sure how the rules were. But Bogdanovich certainly makes it sound like it was completely implausible, and especially when you're working on Roger Corman style budgets, it probably is completely implausible to actually do. And when you're filming on the freeway, I was actually surprised to see what they filmed on the freeway. Not just the stuff when they filmed on the freeway where they're driving and stuff like that from car to car. And obviously that's guerrilla style filmmaking, and they pulled it off effectively. It's the type of stuff that a lot of filmmakers have probably done. And as long as you're doing it safe, then, you can get away with it. But I was really surprised to see the part where he's up on the tower and he's picking off people as they're driving by. And you're seeing car after car of people swerving and screeching off the side of the road. And I could only imagine what the people who are on the freeway were thinking when they kept seeing these things happening.
Sequences where people are, these cars that are obviously in the production, these cars are, careening off the side of the road, and people are falling out of them, clearly getting shot, right? I mean, I can't even imagine being in a car passing what was going on with some of those bits at the side of the road. It's terrifying.
The only thing that I could think of, which I honestly, I can't imagine that they would have done because it would go against guerrilla style filmmaking. And if a cop happened by, he would have stopped them. But if they had put up a sign before cars were getting to that point saying filming up ahead or something like that, just so people were at least aware of it. But again, I can't imagine they were doing that because a cop would then stop them.
Right. But they then have a cop car come by, lights and sirens blazing, driving through the sequence. Yeah. And at the end of this movie, I couldn't help but think, I wonder if they just shot. That was a legit cop car, chasing their production down. I wonder if they got nailed.
I didn't think to look if it actually had a city information on the side of the car, because that's usually how you can tell if it's a movie cop car, because it's just police, something very vague.
Right. Call 555-1212.
Right.
Now, of course, the advice, save your money for the Finnish Kid from Samuel Fuller, and he did. The most expensive sequence of the film is the end of the film, where they actually shoot at the drive-in movie. Not a lot of drive-ins anymore.
Boy, did I love them though when I was a kid.
Although this doesn't help build the case for bringing them back.
No, it's done really effectively, and I can see what Fuller was meaning, because this is a really effective sequence, and obviously it takes place at night, so that adds complexity to it, and there's a lot going on, and I think he arrives at the drive-in about an hour into the film. So it's about 2/3 of the way through. So they shot about a third of the film in about 2/3 of the days. And then the other 2/3 of the film they shot in just 1/3 of the days. So 6 days because they did go over on days. They shot somewhere between 18 and 22 days is what I read. But 12 of those were shot in the drive-in. So that's a hefty chunk of
crazy.
Your schedule.
Yes, that's huge. I mean, as a producer, that's got to give you fits.
Well, what I really liked reading is that he managed to stay on budget with all of that. So
that's like producer porn right there. On budget. And they only had Karloff. Man, they only had him for a day. For one night. That's a testament. The guy's hobbling around. You see his legs?
And he clearly is a consummate professional. Bogdanovich said he always knew his lines. He always was prepared. He'd walk on and would just nail his stuff. And, working in the world of Corman, you can only imagine that this was often get it right the first time, second time if you didn't, otherwise we're moving on. And stuff with Karloff that night. I mean, it works really effectively. I had to go back and watch the scene when he finally confronts Bobby at the end, and kind of that whole the shootout at the end of it, and just how effective it was. I found it really affecting how he just walked up to this young boy and smacks him with his cane and slaps him around a little bit, and then he looks at him cowering in the corner. Is like, is that what I was afraid of?
Yeah.
I was really struck by the power of that line of this old horror star, who was for a moment there terrified of this modern horror, only to see what it shrank to. I found it incredibly affecting.
What's your sense of that final sequence? Because this is where, the Whitman case and this film part ways, right? Whitman was killed that day after during the shootout.
It was a police officer who shot and killed him.
Right.
They ran up the tower and they did kill him. You're right.
Ramiro Martinez and Houston McCoy.
Yes, right.
Anyway, so he doesn't. He ends up dead. In this film, he doesn't end up dead. He ends up bested by this aging, B-movie, monster movie actor. And I wonder what your sense is of the statement that they're making in the film. I found it a little bit puzzling.
Well, there's a couple statements. One, I think his defeat, where he ends up cowering, I felt like that was a statement on kind of his mental state and the lack of real control this guy had, or just the sense that this was a monster, but really one that could be taken easily when he didn't have a gun in his hand. So I thought there was something there. Also, the fact that that he says as he's walking away, I almost hit them all, didn't I? Whatever he said, it was really hardly ever missed.
Yeah, and there's a statement
hardly ever missed, did I?
Yeah. There is truly the statement on mental health in the film.
I'm always torn with this sort of thing because I find that there's some strength in having it end that way, where now they have to face their victims, and they have to face the law, and they have to face society and be judged. And I find there to be a strength in that. But I do also feel, and I think it's just the animalistic urge when you're watching a film like this, to have that urge for revenge and to see him get his comeuppance by getting shot himself. And it's interesting. And I don't know if Bogdanovich had that in mind, to have it end where this guy ends up not getting killed. And, does it make us reflect on ourselves and what we were hoping for?
Yeah, because there's a practical benefit to it, which is that for the script, which is that we get to see a hero moment from Karloff. We needed that, right? And probably it was demanded that we get a hero moment from Karloff. But I agree with you on every point that we need to have this sense of victory, this sense that we caught the guy, that he's going to face up to what happened. But he clearly was not a well individual, and if there was ever an opportunity to tell this kind of dark story and kill the guy in the end. Let me put it this way: had this movie been made in 1978, I have no doubt that he would have died, and it would have been a horrific and bloody gun battle.
It would have been very different. And, I do think that likely Bogdanovich was saying something specific about the way that we would deal with this sort of thing. And I think by not killing him, I think he's saying quite a bit about facing these monsters.
Yeah, this movie is deceptively complex, if only because of what we've lived through culturally in the last 50 years. Before we let it go, just one more comment on Boris Karloff. That guy was in crazy health straits when he made this movie. It felt like he was legitimately not playing a part as you see him walking bow-legged with a cane across a room. And yet he's such a star.
Yeah, he had emphysema. He had only half a lung left at this point in his life. And he also had rheumatoid arthritis, and he would spend his time between takes in a wheelchair with an oxygen mask because he was having such a hard time. But I tell you, again, going back to my comment earlier, he was a consummate professional, and he comes through just brilliantly on screen.
He really does, and that he ended up doing more movies after this. You would see him in this and think, okay, that's it for Boris.
Yeah, you'd think so, but no. This is a guy who, he was sick, but he kept going. He ended up working in 5 more movies after this in a very short period of time. I think he went off to, I want to say, London or somewhere. He did a story somewhere else, and then he came back to LA, and he shot 4 movies back to back with this Mexican producer, Luis Enrique Vergara, who brought Karloff on to do 4 screenplays written by Jack Hill, kind of a B movie guy, in a way where Karloff, all of his scenes could be shot in 1 3-week period for all 4 of those movies. So, I mean, he was old, and they worked really hard to make that happen. And he died February 1969, so not too long after this film was released. But he did get to see it released, and he did get to live with some of the accolades that and the praise that came with his performance here.
We get Frank Marshall. A young Frank Marshall shows up in this film.
I just could not help but laugh when I saw his credit as assistant to the director. I just kept wanting to say, "Hi, Frank Marshall, assistant director." No, assistant to the director. Oh, that just cracked me up. But yeah, he also got to start with Corman and clearly with Bogdanovich, and they worked together here. And he also pops in as the ticket boy. You can see when everybody's coming through, and you see little Frank Marshall there. It's just so funny. And then I guess his parents were in it. His girlfriend at the time was in it. They were all film goers at the drive-in. The dolly grip is there. He plays the father who gets killed, which I think for me was one of the most affecting shots in the film, with the little boy in the passenger seat, and then you pan over and see his dad dead in the seat next to him. Just
awful,
terrifying. Yeah. So again, low budget. That's the world of it.
Yeah.
And I think they made it very effective by, even if they had to bring crew on to play some of the roles.
Talk just a little bit about László Kovács.
Yes.
He's behind the camera. He's not the first time that we've talked about him, but it is the first time we get to talk about him, or it's the first film that we talk about him as László Kovács.
Yes, this was, before this, he was Leslie, and he said to Bogdanovich, he said, I'm going to credit myself as László on your film. I didn't want to do that until I was pleased with the way that a film came out that I had worked on, which I thought was pretty funny. So this was the first time.
We can't let any conversation about the movie go by without mentioning Polly Platt, who was married to Bogdanovich at the time. And between the two of them, P. Bog and P. Platt, they pretty much did the rest of everything on this movie.
This was the time of, low budget. You're going to come on board and you're going to wear many hats. And they certainly did. I think that, she helped him craft the story before Bogdanovich wrote the script. And then she was the production designer and the costume designer, and great use of sets, or reuse of sets, I should say. Basically, give it a new paint job and put some different furniture in it. And it's a totally different place. They do that really well. But in the world of low budget Corman movies, it comes through very effectively. And I think they do it in a way where you hardly notice unless you're really paying attention to those sorts of things.
Peter Bogdanovich is uncredited, but edited the thing after a little bit of hubbub with his original editor. Right.
Yeah. His original editor started working on the film. And I think it was the sequence when Orlok and Jenny are at the restaurant and they're talking to the PR guy about the appearance, and he says, "I'm not going to do it." And the guy is freaking out and he's making his phone calls and all that. His editor was working on that scene, and Bogdanovich said it was just a terrible mess, and so they had to get rid of the guy, and he came on to do the editing at that point.
Interestingly, the woman he has helping on sound in this movie ends up being taking over the role as his editor a little bit later. Verna Fields.
Yeah, she was early in her career as a sound editor, and she did the sound editing here and does a great job with it, especially when you know that shots like, or scenes like the freeway shooting is all recorded without sound, and then they bring all that sound in after the fact. She does a great job there. But yes, and then of course, after this, well, I guess he was editing. It was kind of back and forth through the 60s, but for him, it was a sound editor. But then she turned into an editor for him on some of his later films, like What's Up, Doc, which we talked about, Paper Moon, and of course, we also talked about her on Jaws, which was her last film that she edited.
How does this movie of mass murder tie to this season of Christmas, Andy?
Well, Bogdanovich had actually seen.
What
those
a weird
of you who've
segue.
seen, it is. Anyone who's seen How the Grinch Stole Christmas, the animated TV special, hopefully knows that Boris Karloff actually did the narration of it, and he did it brilliantly. But Bogdanovich had seen it play on TV, and while he was preparing, he's just like, he said, Karloff did such a great job. How can I do a movie with Boris Karloff and not have him tell a story in it? And from that little bit, that's how they ended up putting the scene in when they're in his hotel room prepping for the radio broadcast, and he tells the story Appointment in Samara, which Karloff insisted on doing it in an uninterrupted take without cue cards, and he pulled it off. And I guess it's actually not his story. It's from something, and I can't remember what it is, but it's somebody else's story. It's a very affecting story, beautifully told by Karloff. And after he did it, he got an ovation from the crew because he did such a great job with it.
Wow, that's fantastic. This is a story by John O'Hara, published in 1934, Appointment in Samara. And there you go. I love the treatment of the story where we get his that slow push into him telling that story with all the people that are in the room, sort of eyes on him. It was really beautifully, artfully done. Why did this movie not spawn a franchise, do you think? I mean, the antagonist lived.
Right. Yeah. No, it's not exactly sequel or even remake fodder, although it's one of those films that I don't know. I think it told
the story it needed to tell. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
How to do it award season, though?
Again, it was a Roger Corman film. Paramount bought it and released it, but it wasn't something that anyone really pushed for awards. There are probably reasons for that. But it is a film that has been growing in popularity and notoriety. And in 2017, the Boston Society of Film Critics gave it the Best Rediscovery Award because it's a film that is worth rediscovering.
I love that they came back to it after all those years. that it doesn't get snubbed because so many years have gone by. 49 years later, and they come around to it. It's about time. That's actually why people may not know. That's why we haven't talked about the movie so far, is because we didn't want another non-award-winning movie. We had to wait.
Right.
We had to wait it out. Yeah. How to do at the box office.
After working hard to make films on the cheap to ensure he'd make a profit, Roger Corman gave Bogdanovich the measly sum of $130,000 to make Targets, which is just under $900,000 in today's dollars. And actually, Karloff's fee for the film was $25,000, so he had a hefty chunk of the budget. It does help that some of the footage was from The Terror, but it still had to be a speedy production, as we talked about. After the movie was made, Bogdanovich got a friend of his to get the studio head of Paramount, Robert Evans, to watch it, and Evans instantly wanted to buy it. Others at his studio weren't so keen on it, though, and because of the tone, so they had to keep looking around. But eventually, Evans did manage to convince the others to buy it, so Paramount paid Corman $150,000 for the movie, instantly making it profitable for Corman. The same, unfortunately, didn't hold true for Paramount. The movie was released a few months after Martin Luther King Jr. and Bobby Kennedy were both assassinated, and those events made Paramount nervous about the marketing of the film, and so it was released very quietly, August 15th, 1968. They added a new prologue denouncing gun violence, and the film ended up losing money at the box office. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any exact figures, so that's all I have on this one.
Well, it's, I can certainly understand a cultural response like that. This is one of those movies that I feel like is worth seeing for the skill at tying together a tight, intense, and impacting thriller, and doing it on the cheap. I mean, it demonstrates a lot of skill, and I found it a lot of fun to watch, even though it was incredibly difficult to watch in some sequences.
Yeah, definitely.
I think it's probably time for us to rank it.
Let's do it.
Head over to flickchart.com/thenextreel, and you'll see the list of all the movies we've talked about on this very show. You can swipe over in your show notes, tap Flickchart, and that will take you straight to this movie where you can add it to your list and see how it stands up to ours.
First up, we have Targets or Fat City.
I'm going to go Targets
for me.
Yeah.
Targets or Seven Samurai.
Oh, Andy.
I know. I got to go Seven Samurai.
Yeah, I'm Seven Samurai.
Targets or Mother.
That was so weird. I'm going to be, I think, Targets on this one.
Ooh, really an interesting pairing, though.
Yeah. Troublesome.
With two troubled youths.
Yeah.
Killing people. I am Targets also, though.
All right.
Targets or The Wizard of Oz? I have to say Oz.
I know. I'll give it to you. It seems like too much of a travesty to actually rank Targets higher than Oz. Does the wizard die in the end?
God. All right, here's a fun one. Targets or Escape from the Planet of the
Apes? Lest we face the repercussions of our own community, I'm going to pick Targets on this one.
I think it's an easy one, yeah. Targets. Targets or Das Boot? Definitely Das Boot.
Das Boot, yes.
Targets or Wild Tales?
I think I'd probably go Wild Tales.
Yeah, me too. Targets or Glengarry Glen Ross?
Glengarry Glen Ross, please.
Same for me. Targets or Interstellar?
Interstellar.
I feel like this one I actually would say Targets.
All right, let's do it.
Okay.
All right.
1, 2, 3.
Scissors. Oh, all right.
All right. Sorry about that one.
That's all right.
It's only one space above Interstellar, not too egregious of a win. Targets is at 125 on our chart out of 369 films.
How did it do on your personal chart? We haven't talked about. I think we skipped that on every single one of the Apes movies that we just finished, and maybe for good reason. But I do want to know how this one ended up on your personal chart.
This one ended up at 929 out of 4,039, which is a 77%, which I think is maybe a little low, but I still feel it's in a pretty good spot.
Mine ended up at 194 out of 1,037, which takes it to 81. And that would give me a 4 stars straight up on letterboxd.com/thenextreel if I were to agree with the algorithm. And I think I will do that.
Yeah, for me, this also was a 4-star and a like.
Oh, yes, and a like. Slap a heart on it, Andy.
There it is.
All right.
We've had 3 weeks in a row where we have been in complete agreement with our star ratings.
I love it.
On Letterboxd.
I love it.
That's a rarity.
It's like we're friends.
It's like we've gotten over our 2001 battle.
Don't bring it up. Don't bring it up. Why would you do that? We've had so many weeks where we've been living in blissful ignorance. This is not part of any sort of narrative series. This series is we're talking about 1968 crime films. So how do you choose where we go from here?
Well, that's a great question because our Patreon supporters did get to help us choose the films in this particular series. There was some voting involved. And we selected 4 films, and the next one that we're going to be talking about is Don Siegel's Coogan's Bluff.
Coogan's Bluff.
Yeah, some Clint Eastwood.
This is another one that we hadn't seen. So,
correct.
What a fantastic surprise this shall be. And have you watched it yet? Are you ahead?
I have not.
All right.
I have not.
All right. Very much looking forward to this one, and seeing how it compares. Was there any sense to why we put Targets first?
I don't think so. I think that we just picked. These were the 4 films that were voted on by everybody, and I just feel like it was more random than anything else that they ended up in this particular order.
Well, we start dark. It can only go up from here, maybe.
Well, Coogan's Bluff is listed as an action comedy crime film. So, yes, I think that's fair to say.
Okay.
I don't know about quality,
left turn,
but certainly tone.
All right.
Well, if you want to hear more of us, but you can't wait until next week's show, you can support us over on patreon.com/thenextreel, and you can get access to our exclusive members-only weekend show, The Saturday Matinee. We talk about movie news and new trailers, plus we go head-to-head in our weekly challenge in which we put together lists of movies related in some way to the movie we're discussing that week. There are all sorts of other goodies too if you support us at different levels, so just head on over to patreon.com/thenextreel.
You can learn more about us at thenextreel.com. You can subscribe to the show for free in your favorite podcast app or follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at The Next Reel. And don't forget, you can always join our free Discord channel, our open community Discord channel. You can find a link to that over at thenextreel.com.
The Next Reel couldn't happen without the hard work of Stephen Smart running Instagram, Ben Lott running all things on Twitter, and of course thanks to Eli Catlin, who graciously allows us to use his song Ragtime Instrumental as the theme to this show. You can find out more about Eli on his SoundCloud page.
When the movie ends,
our conversation begins.
Amazon giveth, Andy.
As Amazon sometimes doeth.
Yeah, sometimes it doesn't. It's part of the trouble of having such a quiet release. Like the movie doesn't have, it doesn't feel like it has a massive following today, not even cult following. And as such, there are no 1 or 2 star reviews on Amazon. And so you've had to find a new barrel of which to scrape the bottom.
Oh, I did. Yes. I dug into the audience reviews on good old Rotten Tomatoes.
Oh, that's grim, Andy. Grim,
yes.
Grim when you have to do that.
It can be. It can be. But there I sit.
Well, I'll go ahead and start. I did end up with a 3-star from Amazon because I guess I just wasn't as industrious or smart as you. And so I stayed in this barrel and scrape the sides. Sacramet says, unsettled and unsettling debut. Brilliant, it is not. Still, there's enough going on in Targets to warrant a viewing of Peter Bogdanovich's first film. Between the shoestring budget and having to skillfully horn in previously shot footage of Boris Karloff, the finished product is probably much more refined and linear than anyone should expect. Karloff is a real treat. His turn in Targets is appropriately campy, with an empathetic and sunny demeanor despite the film's bleak trajectory. Targets is a quick 90 minutes or so, but portions of it still feel labored, with unnecessary sequences, superfluous conversations, and lingering freeway shots that make you wonder if Bogdanovich raided the Caltrans closet of 405 stock footage one too many times. Beyond Karloff, most of the acting is hokey to the point of pain. What? And thank God Bogdanovich settled in behind the camera, not in front. What? Still, putting this 1968 film into context, it goes directions that were surely verboten at the time. If Targets was what it took to get Bogdanovich noticed, I'm all for it. The Last Picture Show and Paper Moon were just around the corner. 2 of the great pieces of cinema I still manage to watch at least once a year. Okay, I disagree with a lot of that second paragraph, but the first, I get it. I can see where he's coming from, and I appreciate the clarity of that review.
I think I can agree with that for the most part. But yes, I would agree with your statements. There's some stuff in there and I'm like, really?
Yeah. Come on, man. Come on.
Yes.
All right.
But then again, you have Jared E. over on Rotten Tomatoes who gives it 2.5 stars and says simply, somewhat creative, not very scary. Boris Karloff is weird. And that's Jared.
That's Jared. You know what? I'm going to go read Sacramats again. Thanks, Amazon. It is hard to believe that we have been having in-depth weekly conversations about movies since 2011.
So many great movies, so many great conversations. But it's a lot of work. Producing this show week after week does require a lot behind the scenes. If you'd like to help support our efforts, one easy way is by using our Originals page when shopping for books and movies that we've covered.
Your purchases made through our links give us a small commission at no extra cost to you and allow us to keep having these great discussions.
We had some great films in Season 8 that started their lives as books or plays, and you can find all of them on our Originals page at thenextreel.com/originals.
That's the site where listeners can find links to purchase all the source material behind the adapted films we covered, from Season 1 up through our current season.
For part of Season 8, we had a series celebrating the 50th anniversary of films from 1968.
We talked about 2001 and 2010 for our Odyssey series, both adapted from Arthur C. Clarke's novels. Man, the second one was so much better than the first, right?
Don't you even get me started. Need I bring up Under the Cherry Moon again?
Yes, also so much better.
Wait, no, that's not what I...
Planet of the Apes kicked off its series based on the novel by Pierre Boulet.
We covered Danger Diabolic and The Detective, adapted from novels for our 1968 crime films.
Wait, wasn't that The Detective the prequel to Die Hard?
They were both written by Roderick Thorpe, and yes, it's the same character in the books.
I can't believe they even asked Sinatra if he'd be in Die Hard. That would have been weird.
Once Upon a Time in America was part of our Leone Once Upon a Time trilogy, adapted from Harry Gray's novel.
And we looked at 1968 Best Picture nominees The Lion in Winter, Rachel, Romeo and Juliet, and Oliver!
We also had an Ingrid Bergman series with adaptations like Spellbound, For Whom the Bell Tolls, Murder on the Orient Express, and Gaslight.
We haven't talked about Gaslight.
Stop gaslighting me!
Dive deeper into these books and more adapted films at thenextreel.com/originals. Every purchase supports the podcast.
Get the full list of adaptations that we've covered on all the Next Reel family of podcasts and start your next read today at thenextreel.com/originals.